Excuse me. I'm doing a minor flush. And sleep is rough. And my body feels crazy. Crazy right now. Mind is clear though, which is the great irony. This maybe ties into what I'm looking to talk about today. I'm going to make a post on what is called the Christian remedy, which is a legal remedy. It's a legal term, but basically the spiritual texts are law books or spiritual law books as well. The legal system we have today is a reflection of a spiritual law of another kind, basically an inversion, and that people have to nullify their body, their church, which is basically the body, the bloodline, in the name of the fallen system. I'll even beat up, I know, and we have to nullify that and declare their body basically in God, because the fallen system, the only anything, anyone, and only being, the only concept that it can't turn over or corrupt is the original purpose of creation and the nature of godliness within all the people, the sentient beings, the ones, everyone with a mind and a body and a heart and a soul and spirit basically on top of all of that. And so self-awareness. So there's that. And around the same time I wanted to release that, going through my own things and experiences and just waves of change and emotionality, and same thing it's always been. But this is closer to the start of when I first started to go public, and I was more emotional, and I don't know, it's like new ground or something. But it just feels like there's more focus and there's more weight behind choices we make now as to how they're going to play out in the future, and for the whole, and how much the whole of our existence and our choices is going to have an impact or a weight on what happens to us in the future, and in that sense now. Like the future is more or less coming very quickly, which, it's either or, it's anyone's guess if you ask me. And so I've been having these dream-like visions, or vision-like dreams, dreams that are like visions. But before that, the second thing that I was speaking on is that I began to give this information to the public under the pretense that, maybe the expectation that, the technical knowledge as far as the manipulation and gene therapy or modification and the basically higher dimensional or interdimensional technology, waves and energy and mind control methods and forms of abuse, basically the technical stuff and the dark stuff, that this would be in a way required to reach the right choice. And looking back on that, for some that's true. Basically for like more skeptical or mental people, whereas those with the higher degree of emotion can sense that something is already happening and has been wrong to begin with. Just ask around. And don't discriminate upon who you ask. People will say end time is already coming past. For some nations and bloodlines, it already has in a way. And that whatever happens to the masses won't affect them, because it already happened to them. And in that sense, something happening over a large, scale of population wouldn't be as devastating as what had happened over 1,000, 2,000 years, even though it will look that way. But that's just a thought. Then, as well, those who are physically, really anyone physically, mentally, or emotionally present will know something is wrong, because your body tells you something's wrong. If you calculate the odds, your mind tells you that we should be either more advanced or that something is playing with something. Some things are being corrupted in a way that defies explanation. And emotionally, you know that everyone is more or less suffering in ways that they really shouldn't be, in the sense of the true power and what's really possible. And so, with the main concept then, is that really all one needs to know truly is how to defeat mind control programming and some of the systems, and basically what is more or less classical spiritual possession, whether it's over the youth through the media, or the adults through their version of the media, which are basically just games, or people who are, focusing on that type of thing as an art. Not an art, but a spiritual practice, which is all the same if you think about it. And so really all we need to do is know how to change that. And the point I'm looking at here is that maybe bouncing around, I'm also not comfortable. For some reason I haven't really been comfortable in a while. Is that more or less love, truth? It's what I said and it's what I learned. That truth, compassion, knowledge, self-awareness, free will, harmony, possibly creativity, are the keys to waking up and realizing that something is happening or has happened, and that is something that protects us and shows us our true self, taking us through steps of distance from the illusion to something entirely different, where we have returned to a spiritually fertile state, which isn't conducive for what is basically a fallen spiritual system. And that if every one of us focuses in their own right, in their own lives, on what they would do and how they would act if they were in love, and how they should have acted, or how they could have wronged themselves or others by acting in ways that weren't in love, it accelerates everything. And we don't really need to know exactly about the temporal manipulation and how the fields of energies work, and the different technology that enables mind control and simulated realities, although that reaches, everyone has a different, way of understanding reality and what's happening. But eventually that'll be all one. because it won't be hidden. At least when it's finished, everything will be known, and everyone will have the same understanding. They won't be able to deny it. But that gets into this type of prophetic, like thoughts basically, or impulses, but they're not thoughts or impulses or suspicions. They're common sense. Like what happens when there's so many people that are dependent on the infrastructure that is designed to fail and managed by beings or people who have no tendency, track record, or visible intentions to protect large groups of people, because they're the ones selling them the poison in the first place for, an arm and a leg. Well, clearly that leads only one place, which is that the dependency, the support system would eventually fail. It would be removed, but it would be disguised as failing. And those who don't have the willingness to resist the temptation to basically do evil, to harm one another, will have a big old fray of doing that, and that'll threaten those who do have basically the love in their hearts and a clear mind to reject that and to focus on the solutions, and will be a kind of experience between who's doing that and who's doing basically the destruction, participating in the destruction. It's weird, because before I was sitting here for a while before I pressed the record button, and then I could hear one of the kids knock on someone's door down there, I think the neighbor, and it was like real loud, and she said, she knocked and she was like, open the door, like real loud. Okay, how kids are often. And I don't know, it's just like metaphoric for what I was trying to figure out, whether I wanted to do this or not. And it also relates to the people who are basically, who don't open the door to their heart, more or less. It's like it'll turn to stone. Like that's what sustains us. It's not really the food or the media or the information knowledge, not the wisdom knowledge. It's not any of this technical stuff, but it's, the compassion, and as well a clear mind through that. And the clear mind, you don't need to read a book and figure out how to calculate or theorize or put together a bunch of whatever to come up with a clear mind. You just have a clear mind. If anything, you reject a lot of unnecessary information. And so opening the door to your mind would kind of bring in more information. I see that differently, but opening the door to your heart would bring in an influx of compassion, and as well that would be rough for those going through this, who, just like those now who are going through this but don't realize what they're really going through, and they just know it's like a rough life basically. And that we're all kind of getting the lesser end of the deal, and somebody else, a group of people, are laughing it up and laughing into everyone's faces, whatever that means. But the idea is, and as well, there's a solution of working together, and that it uses the mind and technology. But the 18 and 1900s technology, where they figured out how to make cars run on water and distillation, simple, efficient methods. And then there were soil methods or farming methods that grew like multiple times the amount of crops in a fraction of the time. There's like methods of tweaking the minerals and the pyramids and electromagnetic energy and getting stuff to grow very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. Looking at the studies done in Russia, they kind of blew the lid on that. That if you have a pyramid of a certain degrees, certain angles, it creates a vortex energy zone and brings energy into that area, and that all the wildlife basically grows in abundance in that area. And so, if something happened that took out infrastructure, we could probably build things like that, and distillation systems, and this would more or less hold off. But the point is that if people want to fight, that's not going to work very well, and there's going to be patches of that going on. So the dream I had was, maybe these are influenced by videos that I've seen or movies, but just as much as they are from that, they are from other things. I mean, with my experiences with the access programs, special access programs, we were shown certain things, and we've seen certain things, and we saw different timelines and prophecy where it was explained, as well as certain spiritual texts and scriptures. They're basically all talking about the same thing, or trying to, unless they're talking about the fallen system, but it's the same thing, that they're describing what isn't the truth. And then they're using that as a weapon against the minds of people. And the dream was that basically woke up in the dream, and there's like 2 or 3 like midway dreams, transitionary periods I don't really remember well. But I know I more or less woke up into the dream. I believe it was like into a fighting scene. And it was in the area I grew up, and which is right next to where I am now. And I was more or less defending my parents' house from what looked like gang members or hoodlums, but they weren't really a gang in the sense of like organization and flags and stuff like that. It was what you would call like a roving gang of just like 2 guys that, or 3 or 4 guys that were friends in, what you could call like an end time scenario, and took up arms to just take what they needed, which is what a gang is. But like, it wasn't like this was like they weren't a gang beforehand. They weren't like in any way organized or anything, and it was a lot of it was like almost ghetto. We didn't have guns, so it makes me think that in the idea of guns being hunted, if you will, was possibly something that happened, at least in this like visionary scenario, which possibly could have been better, because then the whole beginning of the dream would have been a shootout, and there might not have been the rest of the dream. So, but still, people that were fighting found weapons to fight with. That's just what it was. And I was defending the house with basically a broken hammer. And they were using dogs. And I remember I ended up hitting one of the dogs, which looked like a dog they stole. And that was actually not very mean, but based on it, they were giving it food, and basically training them to be vicious and attack people. They they stole them, and like soft mind controlled them. No technology or wetware or anything. And I remember I didn't feel remorse on the spot, but I felt blame for the people who had brought the situation basically to everyone, and as well, I did end up leaving the location, and I realized I could have left anyway. But and I did injure a couple of them, and I slightly injured a dog, and I ended up taking the one dog. It looked like a Labrador Retriever, and the others kind of looked like pit bulls and things like that. And I could tell like this wasn't their dog. And I ended up injuring a couple of them, and they were like furious. And I decided there was no point, and I left, and I took the nice looking dog, and we walked, and I noticed that it was basically dying. It was like it was giving up on walking. If you ever seen a dog that's super, super hot, and it just begins to like lay down, but this wasn't just like being prissy, it was like injured and giving up. And I also noticed like its snout on the ground it was blowing dust where there would normally be grass, to the point where it was like a barren wasteland, just for the fact that it hadn't rained. And so obviously it seemed as if there was a drought, and that probably meant crops were dying and food production was low. And so I ended up carrying the dog the rest of the way. and I went across the area to a location I'm at now, and I looked around and asked if there was like a medical area anywhere nearby, and conveniently there was one in walking distance, which in actuality it wouldn't be it would be like about 10 miles away from here, maybe a little more, 15 miles, and maybe in the dream I walked 15 miles, I don't know. It didn't seem that long. It seemed like there was like a building right nearby. And so I waited around a little bit and then took the dog to the nurses, and I'm not sure how that would be treated in an actual situation. I don't know if I was looking for a veterinary. I think there were people there, so it was like a regular place. I think I might have even begged them to just like make sure the dog doesn't die. Basically, I cared for the dog because it was my fault that I had to fight in the area in the way that I did with like crappy tools and weapons, and instead of walking away. But I knew if I walked away, I don't know what would have really happened to the animal, and I had to make a stand. But that was all in pride, and it didn't. Getting the dog out of that situation was the only good thing about it. But the nurses weren't worried about the dog in the sense that they said she's probably just real hungry, and I was like, no, she was like coughing up blood and stuff. We were in like a little battle over the other area, and I could tell this area, I've had dreams like this. I've had so many dreams like this. Basically, everyone's mind is like, this is like a safer area, but we know there's hell right over there, like a stone's throw away. Like they were like hesitant to talk, to communicate, to open up, to enjoy anything. They were not happy, basically. Not in the way people are not happy now. They're just like disgruntled and they want to get out of there. It was like there was nowhere to go. So they couldn't hate being there. Just calculate that, if you will, put that into perspective. If the way people are disgruntled now, but that's because they don't want to be there, they want to go somewhere else. Well, people weren't disgruntled, their spirits were low because they knew there was nowhere else to go, that it was everywhere. It was literally like, a movie or something, but it wasn't extravagant like a movie. It was like some of these things that I've seen where it's just people. It's just how people would react, and it's sad. So, lack of spirit. And so, they gave the dog some food and water, and it was just dehydrated and starving. And so it started to perk back up to life. Something happened from there. I left, and this could be like a year later, a month, a week later. I hope these types of situations wouldn't last long. People would wake up to what has to be done. But basically, I was backpacking. That's all people ever did. Just roam around looking for food. And they tended to gather in groups because it was safer that way. And so I was backpacking. I had a little amount of food. We were in a house, which also happened to be the old house, which is ironic. I think that's just like a twist of scenery. Electricity was still there, but it was just like that solemn situation. Nobody knew really what to do or where they were going to be next, or what was going to happen. They just knew it was bad, and nobody had the luxuries that they had before that they basically took for granted. And I had like a test tube of food, which makes me think, it's genetically modified food. And I remember eating, it was like a few potato chips basically. I remember eating some of them and then like basically half eating a slug and like spitting it out into a sink, like an open area sink that was basically, everything was communal. And I remember somebody else dumped a bunch of cucumber as well, which now that I wonder, it was odd because in a time of great suffering, there's I think the metaphor behind that is there's still waste, there's still lack of care and lack of sharing. I was spitting out half chewed up slug and some potato chips, and somebody threw a cucumber in the mix. And it's also almost possible to get the cucumbers down the drain. It was sliced cucumbers, and then some guy brought his kid because he had to wash his kid's hands. And it was funny because he didn't really care that all that was in the sink. He was just like, whatever. And he had his son wash his hands in the sink, basically rubbing up against the dirty water and the food waste, which was otherwise clean for the most part. It was just weird. It was the metaphor behind it, the message, the idea is that people didn't care about the conditions that was taking place. At least the stuff we care about now, like, oh, it's icky, people didn't give a darn. It was just whatever. That's what it was. And everyone had a backpack or some form of like wilderness survival, just so that they could carry what they needed. And everyone was either in groups of like 2 or 3, or they were alone. And I remember I was alone there. I remember there was a lack of spirit. I mean, there was a lack of remorse and feeling. It was like a destitute feeling of being empty. Although for some reason I knew what was happening on some level, but I wasn't, it wasn't like I was who I normally am and asking people about it, although, I would speak to these things, speak on certain things, just waking people up, waking myself up to friends. And if you are a person who does that, there will be times where you'll meet random people and you'll just connect on that level, and you'll start unveiling basically each other's soul, and you'll realize you both know things. And so it was like nobody really cared, if you will, because what could you do if it was just your mind? And now if you do this to your mind, but you still have the things that you could take for granted and ignore the dark part of that, but take in the light. What if you couldn't enjoy anything and you still had to use your mind, and it was like a world of darkness and you had to find or make the light? People were tired. And so the next scene was interesting. It's the same room, a bunch of people standing around. And even in that time, they were watching TV, and they were watching some concert. And the people playing on stage were like overtly presented as like robotic people. Like they were not real people. And there was a person who was a lady more human on stage singing. She was like in competition with somebody else who was literally like a robot, and then in appearance, and then it was almost like a cartoon robot or something. And then the performance was the lady trying to basically keep up with the performance of the robot, and the robot was just like belting out songs of every different performance or performer of this era. Like basically 15, 20 songs came out in fast succession, and it was clearly like a cyborg. And it was clearly not, the sound was just playing basically, but it was being generated out of a person or a computer system or whatever it was, and the person was just like a figurehead. And the human was like getting showed up and couldn't do anything. And it was like, that's what the TV was telling us, like, give up your humanity for a new cyborg existence. And everyone, it was like the news in a time of, like a tornado warning or something. Everyone was just watching that and entranced. Like people didn't move or talk. There was nothing to talk about. What are we going to do? Half starve and find food. What else are we going to do? Worry about it. What else are we going to do? Talk about stuff and realize we don't have anything to talk about anymore because we didn't open our minds when we had the time in our hearts. And not, and then avoid talking about that because that just makes us depressed. And, that would increase suicide rates or something like that. And so everyone's just silent talk, looking at the media, looking at the cyborg versus human art show, performance showdown. And it was terrible. There's like no remnant of what humanity should be, or what we call humanity. Spiritual existence and wakefulness and emotional presence of self, and being, and motivation and connection and inspiration and doing and creating, compassion for one another, and the truth of accepting what had happened and where we had been wrong. And I can't really remember much after that, but I had thought about like what had happened when people tried to gain access to these areas, basically, and that there were guards. They were like beefed up guards, and their faces were red. They were angry. they were like hot, but they were angry, and it was as if they were possessed. That like you could have bum rushed them with open arms. Bum rushing is a bad word, but it was like a militarized police force. You could have approached them, in kindness and weakness, and they would have like butted you, had hit you with the butt of their weapon, angrily, knowing in their heart that they want to help you, but that they can't because they'll get easily chopped, and that's that. And it's just not, they're not in power. People were not in power. And, it's a metaphor for this world and possibly something that could happen. We were told there would be earth changes. We were told there would be either an attempted uprising or a artificial uprising, and that would result in the implementation of a control system, and that weapons and certain issues, there's an issue with that, I'm not going to really speak on that, and that people would be influenced by certain disasters, whether they were artificial or real, and it wouldn't almost matter other than knowing, because the physical effect and the mental effect would be the same, and that those who prepared would be protected. And it's the same old story, that those who prepared would be protected, that those whose hearts were pure, who had remained connected to the central aspects of what it means to be alive and be a living, spiritual, emotional, physical being, and what we view often as a human, which I said before, I'll say it again, the definition of human is to be changed, and that those who don't have that will react like animals, and that in a sense this whole event will be to separate those from the original people, or at least the actual living sentient beings. In the same sense, those who are protected will be protected. Those who basically messed up and have like a broken track record will have to go through a time of suffering mixed in with the fake gangs that'll be roaming around, to go through enough suffering to be given enough options to do wrong, to turn over enough options to do wrong, to do right, to do good, to prove that they aren't really part of the suffering, they're not supposed to be there, and protection will basically be bestowed upon them. And the last realization that I had was that we won't be able to do anything. People who fight, who throw rocks, it's not going to do anything. The only option is that people come together in groups, use the simple technology to get water and food and to grow safe, crops, and the environment will also be tore up at this time, so there won't be much to do. And basically pray and use the heart to change things. I know that does things for me because I know the science behind it. I know your mind and heart are like scalar generators that emit a biophotonic field that resonates kind of like a computer system, a living system, but it's not a computer system, it's life. It's mind outside the body. It doesn't mean it's a computer system, but that the functions you enter into this reality, that you, literally the air and the ground and all the living things, it speaks to reality. It speaks to this whole system, and the point is, the only option would be to bring back a higher power. And the higher power will be through people returning to the heart, going through that tribulation process where those who were kept the heart pure and the mind pure through that will be protected, and they won't have to go through the majority of the suffering, and those who messed up will go through a period of suffering, and that those who had never let their heart basically be pure, ever have never been pure, will be the ones that are going to be basically burning the cities down. And this is also an area in the suburbs, so I'm sure if I lived in the cities it would have been a different dream. But we're not too far from the cities. We're told to get away from the cities, get away from coastlines and cities. So And then there is old prophecy from multiple groups of people from all the way to the beginning of what we call time up until, these are people who weren't in, America wasn't discovered back then. And there's people, tribes from this time in America that wrote the same things, and that the Midwest is basically going to be a gathering point because there will be earth changes making all the other areas uninhabitable. Time dilation. We looked at all time. So there's a commentary for my life and my decisions by these secret groups that are a mixture of scientists, alchemists, leaders, inventors, celebrities, politicians. So yeah, discarnate or reincarnated rulers from another time. Like they examine your whole thing and I don't know, talk about it. But that was back a little bit, but weird stuff. But yeah, the return of the heart, the introducing of a higher power, the only thing that can defeat the debauchery and the lies and the destruction that is planned, or at that point would have basically had arrived. That's the only thing. And as well, people will wonder where God is or where the truth is. And these may be people who have a faulty view of what it should be and basically have an expectation of graces or grace that is not accurate in the true sense of reality of what the body and the mind is and what really, how things really work. Whether it's, it's not just a show, but one's heart must be pure, and in that, nothing can really change that once you're that way. Anything that tries to change that only makes it more so. And that's where temptation can change that. You can change it. But if somebody, tries to force it, you wonder why are they so adamant about forcing a change of something that's not real. Well, and I don't mean the mainstream version of any of these words that I'm using. Be aware, that's the case with that. It's close, but they're all modified so that people don't know really what they're doing or talking about. Otherwise, the whole world that uses these words would not exist in the way it does now. Clearly it does. Clearly their definitions are altered, and there's evidence that everything was altered. And you can see it happening right in your face. It's the so-called media and so on. The events of what's called the awakening. It's like a nexus point for multiple civilizations that had passed through these types of periods in their own way and landed at different levels of reality. And there's one that was true, basically. The rest were illusions. The true ones they weren't like all possessed and doing crazy stuff, and everyone else was like these mind parasite robot things were causing them to sacrifice everyone over and over again to kill everyone. I realize now, look into Donald Marshall and some of the others. They're trying to perform a ritual to open up basically a fallen portal through the continual ritual sacrifice of people. I didn't realize that back then. I was like, they're just like stabbing people again and over, and then they did it again, and then they cloned everybody and they did it again. They were trying to unlock something. They weren't just getting off. They get off. Alright, everybody gets off at what you do best. They were trying to perform a certain process. They were trying to enact the end. I realized that now. Listen to my talks. I didn't put together before. This is 1 year later of beginning to speak about this publicly. It's like waterfall information. Well, something has to happen anyway because something always happens. And after that time, I'm sure there would be great change and a restoration of truth. But we have to keep that while we're here, now, at all times. I'm Probably going to eat at some point today, and probably sleep a little bit better maybe. But I feel better from having said that in itself. Still didn't say much. All right, thank you. I just wanted to add that the reason people are here are to help one another. People are here for people, to help each other. It's like a paradox. Earth is like a theater where missions are underwent, where, I don't know how to put it. People have a mission to come here to deliver a message or say something or do something or have an effect, and it's basically to help or rescue people. It's almost like a paradox. We're here because the need that we're here is to help each other based upon the fact that we're here. And, you know, everyone's looking for purpose and meaning. Some look for power, but everyone wants love. Maybe there are groups that don't agree with that, but you know, that's what it is. And the only way we suffer is if we don't treat ourselves, you know, as we should. And in the same sense, it's basically our purpose in a way. And when the mission is done, we leave, and from this perspective it looks unpredictable, but it's really not. You know, look into the unacknowledged special access programs. They discovered the true nature of reality. They looked into the universe and what is going on and found that there are hierarchical spiritual planes and entities in either direction. And you have, you know, the energy planes between the spaces that we have here. It's kind of difficult to view it, perceive it. And the lower, you could say, it's really an alternate, is it feeds on the suffering of the innocent. And they found in these projects that there are groups who basically made a pact to continue this process through the controlling of the suffering of the innocent, literally through ritual sacrifice. And that there's the higher, and the higher simply wants people to treat each other with compassion and know the truth. It's like it's polar opposite, but it's not a polar opposite because the opposites coincide and become one. It's like a dual and a non-dual. The other end isn't really the other end of that, it's the all of all things. You know, compassion isn't the opposite of hatred or lust for power. It's wholeness instead of partiality. You know, wholeness isn't the opposite of partiality, it's completion. Partiality is an incompletion, it's not the reflection of wholeness, the opposite of wholeness. Yeah, they found that it's happening everywhere, and these groups infiltrated every society, every aspect. And you see in the media, it's coming out more now. It's pretty much what's going on. They use electromagnetic devices to produce an electrogravitic effect on space-time, create a bubble which lenses time, and they can shoot a laser through it, and instead of going around the bubble, they can basically make it go into the past. And they viewed the previous era of civilization, and humanity was literally in a type of it was like another universe, technically it wasn't a universe, it was another dimension or something. These are the words they use. It's weird, but the deception groups put all this stuff out to make it look stupid or to make it sound all fluffy or something. And that people lived for thousands of years, and it was a plane of abundance instead of there being high density areas of energy that diffuse out into low area until it's basically a scarcity system. It was, you could say maybe the opposite in that sense, but really it's not the opposite because it's not literally like a polar opposite. But it was a plane of abundance where the energy of space was at a high, it was constantly at a high level, and the anomaly there would be having a low level area, meaning if people wanted to die, people chose to die to give up their form and go into a new form. It didn't happen because they ran out of fuel or genetic, structure or something like that. And so but they found the reality of the human soul, that where the body is physical, is kind of like mechanical, the spirit is eternal, can't be created or destroyed. The consciousness from the brain is dependent on the track of time of experiences that a person is having in relation to the sensory perception of the physical moment. And that if a person is shown what's going to happen, or even what has happened to a degree of nearing absolute perfect accuracy, it launches their being into a transformed state beyond just a physical being, or just even, it's basically, right now we're mainly physical with spirit. It makes the person go from that to mainly spiritual with some physicality to them. People that are primarily in body consciousness basically usually leave their body at that point, permanently or through death, which means that we're from the brain designed to not see beyond what is occurring right now, but from spirit we have access to all of time and all of what's taking place. And all these things were figured out, and that there's the lower spiritual entity basically stole humanity, the souls of humanity, from the original plane and brought them into this place, which is like a fallen dimension, which was called the fall of man. And that the spiritual texts, which were all modified, that spoke on the fall of man and all these issues and the earlier times, were literally describing another dimension that humanity, or the original, not really original, but the true essence of what people are, came from. And that this is basically an illusion, and the whole system works it's designed out of illusions, out of deception. It's not even really hatred. It's just the use of illusions and deception to gain power and to indulge. Like, that's what it's based upon. And that they found it's basically like a computer code. Like, that's what the mind of the entity is, that infects realms and produces this artificial decay pattern. And it's literally, all it's doing is eating up 90% of the energy here, and we get 10% to survive off of, for literally like 10% of what our lives would naturally be, or somewhere near that, if not even beyond what we can imagine, and the amount of information and sensory experience we would be having. You have to imagine, if life is what it is and there's no backdrop other than not life, then what shapes the limitations of what can be? Life is miraculous, and every instance of it is based upon that. So it could be anything, it could be infinite. Yet we have a situation that's described or degraded into scarcity, and it's through deception and illusion and it's still miraculous. Everything that happens is miraculous, but people treat each other a way where it's not, sufficient for the amount of truth that we have access to. And so I just kind of wanted to add that. Think about the 3 types of people: those who never lost compassion, who lost it but will have to go through tribulations and basically see the effects of that and what that means, and deny and cling, or not cling, but to choose compassion and improve themselves, and then those who never really accepted it. And there's a lot more of these child abuse issues coming out on the media, in the media. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Alright? We were told it wasn't going to be a coincidence. And as well, we might not have the old time tribulations coming. That might have been literally the old time layer where it was like a satanic deception takeover. And we were told that's not what it would be, but that there would still be earth changes and basically some major upheavals. Which is why I'm saying this. But yeah, we're here for the spirit. That's what we really are. Everything else is a uniform. You can call it a show. They've known this, they figured this out, and they've known this, and they're waiting for people to wake up. They're waiting for humanity to rise to their own power of compassion. That's what this whole era is about. It's literally like mission to Earth. So, maybe that'll help you put the pieces together and, find your purpose or feel what you want to feel. And there's a lot of great things to be had. I'm in a bit of a rut with my injury here. It's like I have to, if you see me shifting and stuff, because I have to hold my right side of my body up because it's tearing some stuff out. It's all planned, all part of the show, right? Everything that happened brought me here, so it is what it is. I'm not gonna lose compassion. But the other part of that, showing people too much, it has the effect of launching them out of this plane, and in that sense, if they're not prepared, their physical body will be left behind. So we have to move in a sacred fashion, if you will, and have, basically it's supposed to be a controlled process. Alright, thank you.